You've probably seen some of those headlines making waves recently about cancer becoming more common in younger people.
Yeah, it's definitely getting attention.
And what's really standing out is this noticeable rise specifically among women.
That's right. We're going to dive headfirst into a recent report from the American Cancer Society and look at some expert analysis too, just to really understand what's going on with this trend. It's quite different from how we used to think about who gets cancer, typically.
Now, I think when people hear this, the natural reaction is, well, concern. And that makes
Of
sense.
course.
But it's really important to remember, and the report stresses this, that overall cancer death rates are actually going down, improving, actually.
That's a crucial piece of context, yeah.
So even though we're seeing more diagnoses in younger women, the bigger picture for survival, it's looking brighter overall.
Exactly. So the main thing for our deep dive today is figuring out this sort of paradox. Why are we seeing more cancer in younger women? What factors might be behind it?
And maybe most importantly, what can actually be done?
Right. And while there isn't one single easy answer, the data does point towards some really compelling ideas that experts are looking into.
And to really get a handle on this, we're focusing on this big new report from the American Cancer Society, plus insights from cancer specialists, epidemiologists. Okay, so let's unpack this. Historically, cancer was seen as, mainly a disease hitting older adults, and often more men than women.
That was the traditional view, yes. But this ACS report really highlights a major shift. We're now seeing cancer rates in younger women that are basically the same, or sometimes even higher, than in younger men.
And there was one statistic that really jumped out. Women make up, what, 2/3 of all cancer diagnoses in people under 50?
A striking 2/3, yeah. That's a really significant difference.
Wow.
It is. And, while it might seem like this is totally new, the data actually suggests younger women have had higher rates than young men for, well, at least 3 decades.
Oh, really? So it's not brand new?
Not entirely new, no. But the concern now is that this gap isn't shrinking. It actually seems to be kind of widening slowly.
Okay, so if we look closer at why diagnoses are up for women under 50, what specific cancers are really driving this?
Well, breast cancer is definitely a major factor. The report points out that rates are climbing faster in women under 50 compared to older women. That's a really key part of this whole picture.
And it's not just breast cancer, though, is it? I think colorectal cancer came up, too.
Absolutely. We are seeing colorectal cancer rates rise in this younger group for both women and men. But it impacts the overall stats for women more, partly because they already have higher rates of some other cancers. Things like thyroid, cervical, uterine cancers, the higher rates there also add to the overall trend for women.
Right.
And even lung cancer. While rates are dropping overall, which is great news, the drop is slower for women than for men.
That's really interesting when you compare it to men under 50. You said their overall rates are more stable?
That's right. Overall diagnosis rates for men under 50 are holding pretty steady. Now, there are increases in specific cancers for young men like leukemia, testicular cancer, kidney cancer.
Boy.
But yeah, the overall shift, this trend we're discussing, it definitely seems more pronounced for women right now.
These different patterns really make you think beyond just, genetics.
Yeah.
Because, like experts say, our basic genes haven't changed that drastically in just a few decades.
Exactly. Genetics plays a role, no doubt, in individual risk, but it's pretty unlikely to be the only reason for these big recent shifts across the population.
Right.
And that's where this idea of upstream factors comes in. It's really important. Think of these as the bigger picture things: community influences, environment, society, stuff beyond just what one person does that can shape who gets cancer and how well they do.
Okay, so let's dig into some of those potential factors. The report mentioned estrogen exposure, especially related to breast cancer risk.
Yeah, that's a really interesting area. The theory is that more lifetime exposure to estrogen could be a contributor to these rising breast cancer rates in younger women.
How does that work exactly?
Well, the regular menstrual cycle, with ovulation happening month after month, that's a major source of estrogen exposure during a woman's reproductive years.
Okay. So how does that connect to higher risk now?
Well, think about some trends like decreasing birth rates, especially younger women having fewer children in many countries. Fewer pregnancies usually mean fewer breaks in ovulation.
Ah, I see.
So potentially more cycles over a lifetime, maybe more cumulative estrogen exposure. Plus, there's the trend of puberty starting earlier in girls. Some link that to childhood obesity rates rising, which also means more years of menstrual cycles overall.
That connection between birth rates, puberty timing, and potential exposure is, quite something to think about. The report also mentioned something about when a woman has her first child, or if she has children at all.
Exactly. Women who have their first baby earlier in life generally have a lower risk of postmenopausal breast cancer, whereas women who never have children, and that's becoming more common, tend to have a slightly higher risk. The thinking is that the hormonal changes and the changes in breast tissue during pregnancy might offer some long-term protection.
Okay. Now, obesity also came up as a likely factor, didn't it? Especially for that rise in early onset colorectal cancer.
Yeah, that link looks pretty significant. And it's often not just about extra weight itself, but what goes with it may be less physical activity, higher calorie intake. Some call it an energy imbalance.
Right.
And this imbalance can mess with different processes in the body, potentially raising cancer risk.
And diet seems absolutely central to this, too.
Oh, definitely. Several studies have pointed towards diets high in, like, ultra-processed carbs, fatty and sugary foods, lots of red and processed meats, and not enough fruits and veggies, being linked to this early onset colorectal cancer rise.
Makes sense.
And there's also some really fascinating research going on about our gut microbes, the bacteria in our digestive system and how they might play a role.
Shifting gears slightly, environmental pollutants, the report brought those up too. That's an area that honestly can feel a bit overwhelming.
I get that. It can feel huge. But it's important to remember, while we have made progress regulating some known bad actors like asbestos and arsenic, there's growing concern now about other pollutants, especially those things called forever chemicals, PFAS.
Yes, I've heard of those. They're in everything, right?
Pretty much. They're synthetic chemicals. They stick around for ages in the environment and in us, and they're in tons of everyday products, our water, food.
And they're linked to specific cancers.
Some research suggests a connection between certain PFAS exposure and a higher risk of cancers like kidney and thyroid cancer. The big challenge, as the report notes, is they're so widespread and we're still figuring out the long-term effects. It makes regulating them really complicated.
Okay. On maybe a slightly more positive note, the report did suggest that part of this increase in diagnoses might actually be because we're getting better at finding cancers early through screening.
That's a really important point, yeah. Better screening tech, especially mammograms for breast cancer, has definitely led to finding more cancers. And crucially, finding them earlier when they're often much more treatable.
So more diagnoses sound scary at first, but finding them early is actually a good thing for many people.
Precisely. Earlier detection usually means more, and often better, treatment options and, better outcomes. And speaking of outcomes, the report does have some good news about overall cancer survival.
Yes, that's great to hear. Survival rates overall are better than ever. But, and this is a big but, the report also points out these improvements haven't really reached everyone equally.
This is such a critical point. The report really highlights that Black and Indigenous Americans still face higher cancer death rates. And it's due to a whole mix of complex reasons.
Like what?
Things like cost barriers to getting care, just not having facilities nearby, maybe higher exposure to environmental carcinogens where they live, and often less access to really high-quality early detection programs.
And didn't the report mention something about maybe promoting screening in some places without making sure there's good follow-up care available?
Yeah, that's a really crucial nuance. Screening is only really helpful if the system is there to make sure people who get a positive result can actually get the follow-up tests and treatment they need, promptly and properly.
Right, that makes total sense. So, putting all this together, what can people actually do to try and lower their own personal cancer risk?
Well, the report really hammers home a few key things. The single biggest impact action: avoid tobacco. All of it. Smoking cigarettes, vaping, e-cigarettes.
Even vaping. The risks there are still being studied, right?
They're still being fully understood long-term, but it is definitely not risk-free. So avoiding all tobacco is number one.
Okay. And diet seems like another big one people can control.
Absolutely. Eating a diet that's high in fiber, low in red and processed meats, cutting back on those ultra-processed carbs, highly recommended.
Right.
And the American Cancer Society also stresses getting regular physical activity and trying to maintain a healthy weight.
What about alcohol? Does that play a role?
Limiting alcohol can definitely reduce the risk for several cancers. And that might be especially important for people who have certain genetic factors that make them more susceptible.
And vaccines. Preventative vaccines are important too, aren't they?
Hugely important. You're thinking like the HPV vaccine.
Exactly.
Yeah. Vaccines for hepatitis B and HPV are really powerful tools for preventing the cancers linked to those viruses. And, of course, keeping up with recommended screenings, breast, colorectal, lung cancer for smokers, that's still vital for catching treatable cancers early.
It really sounds like while individual choices matter a lot, the report is also saying these bigger, broader factors, policy, environment, have a huge impact too.
That's a really crucial takeaway, I think. Individual actions are vital, yes. But those upstream factors we talked about, pollutants in air, water, soil, they have massive effects on public health and cancer rates. Tackling those really needs policy changes, collective action.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, what's the main message you think people should take away from all this?
I think it's that this rise in cancer among young women is, well, it's complicated. It's driven by this mix of things changes in hormone exposure over a lifetime, lifestyle factors, possibly environmental stuff, and also we're just finding more cancers earlier because of better screening.
Right. And while more diagnoses need attention, it's also good to hold on to that positive news about survival rates improving overall.
Definitely.
But at the same time, we absolutely have to keep focused on those health inequities, the fact that not everyone is benefiting from these advances in the same way.
Precisely. And maybe just a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Beyond the choices you make for your own health, what about those bigger environmental and societal things in your community that might be influencing cancer risk? What kind of collective effort or policy changes might we need to really tackle these trends and aim for better health for everyone?